Welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show. I'm your host, Ankur Shah Delight. This is Season 6, and get ready, everybody, because Season 6 is where we recognize not only the inevitability of conflict, but we see its transcendent potential. That's right. The only way out is through. So last week I came at you with the whole map of what I'm going to do this season involving 10 definitions of heroism and 10 different episodes. And this week, predictably, if you know me or have been listening to the show, not exactly going to do that. But it'll be close. It'll be related thematically. And this is about, maybe it's about mediation. It's about conflict resolution. It's about the future of work. So I made 2 videos this week, which I posted to YouTube, both on conflict resolution. And they're both based on the work of Ken Cloke. And I had this training with Ken a few weeks ago. One is my synthesis of what mediation is based on the training I took with him. And the second is 16 definitions of mediation that Ken gave me, rapid fire with no preparation or reflection, when I was just trying to get some funny material for the first video. Like literally, I wanted him to spin around in a chair and then laugh and then tell me how many countries he's worked in, because I used all those clips in the first video, and that's all. And then I just asked for a textbook definition of mediation with the intention of ridiculing it as boring as like a humorous section in the video. But instead, he just blew my mind. Of course, that's like classic Ken Cloke style. So I'll splice in the audio of both of those videos at the end of this episode. But first, here's my big idea for the day, which is why purpose is survival. So as you know, we've been talking about purpose for a long time on this show, but I've got to put in these terms of survival and necessity, in a sense, essentialness, or nobody really seems to care. Because when purpose seems like a luxury, of course, most people aren't going to engage. And there's a real truth to that. You know, if you're homeless or you're barely able to put food on the table, it's going to be hard for me to sell you on taking the time to find out what you're actually here to do and how to maximize your contribution and really feel empowered and épanoui is the French word, just like open in this flower of potential. So enter the gift of artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is this level of technology that is either here or just around the corner, according to many people. And my focus is not to get into that debate or explain the technology, although there's a lot of great debates to be had there, but just to take seriously the claim that everything's going to change and AGI will revolutionize work by obviating our need to do anything repetitive, boring, easy, mildly creative, or anything that interchangeable humans could do, this bot is going to be able to do. So there's a lot of other claims being made. I don't want to get all into it, but just to give you a little flavor, I think it's ethical. There's also a pretty reasonable chance that this super intelligent AGI could lead to the end of human civilization as we know it, or even the extinction of the human species. And those are important possibilities to take into account. But for the moment, we have the luxury to focus on purpose. And the combination of cheap power and AGI could mean that there's really no more bullshit jobs. That anything that doesn't excite you or make you come alive, and maybe even many things that do, will be done better and cheaper by the great machine world. So, great. And unless the people in power are excited by widespread chaos and instability, and obviously we know some of them are, but most of them probably are not, they're going to institute some sort of system of basic income to keep us pacified and fed as this happens. But, which is great. I think it's going to be necessary. But peace and food don't do anything for our really higher level desires: creativity, meaning, purpose, transcendence, self-actualization, and any off-the-shelf job that you can imagine, the kind of thing that most of us are probably doing, the kind of thing that you could be hired for and then fired from, and then somebody else could be hired for that same role. All of that is not going to exist. All that is going to be taken over by the machine, which means that for the humans who do end up working and contributing, all the work they're doing will end up having to be deeply personal and meaningful. It's all going to be like custom from here on out, molded around that human's particular combination of experience and motivation and superpowers and trauma. It's all the stuff that we talk about. So finding out what that is takes a long and attentive process of reflection, right? It usually requires years of experimentation. It's one of the main things that we do in our coaching. I call it finding your purpose analytically. It's so funny how the religious world has this hold on purpose. Like anytime you look up a podcast on purpose, it's like all very like Christian oriented, which is interesting because great. They're tuned into the fact that there's purpose, but there's like, it's available for everybody, right? So rather than a prayer-based process, what I'm talking about is a data analysis-based process where the data is your observation of your life experiences, and that's how you deduce your purpose. So look, most people do not want to do this now, but as I rub my hands gleefully together, pretty soon we're not going to have a choice. We're all going to be living off basic income, which is a fancy term for welfare. And most people know the psychologically destructive consequences of not feeling useful to society. So we're going to have to do something, or we're going to go insane or take drugs. Not the good drugs either. So what I love about this is that the problems that will be the hardest for the machines to solve, as far as I can tell at this moment, are the empathic problems. And they're actually the same problems that the technocrats have had a really hard time with. So it's the surgeon who can make minute and incredible cuts in your heart or your brain to fix your body, but with this terrible bedside manner who can't talk to someone reasonably about their own death. Or it's the engineer who can spec out how big a dam needs to be built in order to generate power for the entire country, but it's going to flood hundreds of villages, and they don't bother going through the process of negotiating with people or telling people or even just listening to people's stories about it. Or the teacher who doesn't get why the kid isn't able to learn the alphabet. I'm like, look, the method is in the book and the research says you got to do this. Or the divorcing couple that breaks out into a physical altercation in the courtroom or on TV. All of these are like empathy. And we're already not that great at it. But I think it's one of the last bastions of human work and involves being excited to deal with the complexity of humans. You see why I'm into this? The only way out is through. It's like, rather than seeing this conflict as like, God, humans are so irrational. Like, why can't they get their shit together? It's like, oh, this is the hard problem. This is the hard problem that only we can solve, right? And there will be other streams of human work, like managing the machines, but it's pretty easy for us to imagine who's going to be managing the machines and calling those shots in 20 years. It's not going to be the humans. So here's the point. Being a hero means being the most you, and making you the biggest contribution you can be to the whole, right? That's one of the ways we talk about what we talk about. We're part of this giant evolutionary process. We're all part of it, whether we want to or not. Being a hero is like owning our role into it and then contributing to the whole, right? Like integrating with the whole. And my contention is that this potentially cataclysmic transition into AGI is going to be a very helpful motivator for that process. And of course, there's going to be a lot of conflict at every level of organization as we go forward, which means the gospel of Ken Cloke is incredibly important to share. So given that's my little intro. Here's the audio from the first video, my video defining mediation, based on my time with Ken. I think it's about 6 minutes. And after that, I'll give you the second video, which contains 16 definitions of mediation from Ken in his own words, with a little like front and back matter that's part of that YouTube video world. So you can get a sense of what I'm doing over there. And in the show notes, both these videos will be linked. I'm learning about editing and cuts and fonts. So would love your feedback on all that. And if you listen to YouTube, you can do all the YouTube-y type things. Go forth, prosper, and remember, the only way out is through.
Hey everybody, just a few weeks ago, I finished an advanced mediation training seminar with Ken Cloke, one of the modern godfathers of mediation, who has a really different and a very deep take on what mediation is and how it can be used. So I want to make a series of videos about mediation from the Ken Cloke perspective. And this is number one, what is mediation? So for background, Ken Cloke is one of the most experienced mediators alive.
I have done well over 5,000 mediations over the course of 43 years in over 25 countries.
He's seen virtually every type of conflict imaginable, from marital to workplace to national and even international.
India, Pakistan, Ukraine many years ago, Cuba, Zimbabwe, China, long distance, shall we say, in a variety of different countries in Africa. Shall I keep going?
And he's a world famous heavyweight bodybuilding champion.
Not exactly.
The reason I want to start with this seemingly elementary topic is that every other treatment I've seen of it just barely scratches the surface. And with Ken's aid, I want to take us much, much deeper. So what is mediation? Mediation is a conflict resolution process that's both facilitated and collaborative. And if that meant absolutely nothing to you, great. It shouldn't. It's just a bunch of words. I have some context. A conflict resolution process is anything that helps us deal with conflict. And we're dealing with conflict all the time. But there's basically 4 resolution processes that we'll see a lot. And those are violence, law or litigation, negotiation, and mediation. And so I'll just go through the differences between those because that'll help give us the context as to what exactly mediation is and why it's so important. I have some context. So the key distinction here is about power. Mediation and negotiation do not require power. They're not coercive. They're voluntary and collaborative, whereas violence and the legal system have some amount of coercion and power. The reason that's important is that any solution based on coercion or power is going to be fragile because it's going to depend on the balance of power, which everybody is always trying to change. In a violent situation, let's say we're in a separation. I'm really afraid of you coming back to the house for whatever reason. I say, if you ever come back to the house, I'm going to kill you. That's conflict resolution through violence. It might be effective as long as you believe that the threat is credible, until, of course, you seek some way to disturb the balance of power by getting your own weapon or filing a suit against me or restraining order or whatever it is. So it's similar with the legal system. It's fundamentally coercive. This time the state is involved, and hopefully it's a lot more fair in areas where fairness is even possible. But it's not something that could survive the change in a balance of power, and therefore it's fundamentally fragile. So that's what we mean by collaborative as opposed to coercive. When we say facilitated, we just mean there's another person in the room. In the violence situation, if I didn't want to kill you myself, I'd hire an assassin, and that would be a facilitated violent solution. Mediation is just a facilitated negotiated agreement. So it's totally voluntary. It depends on consensus. Both people have to agree, but there's someone in the room who's kind of the adult who's able to handle themselves. And that's really critical to this process, because if everybody were emotionally tuned in, aware of what they're feeling, aware of the information contained in their feelings, and not just responding directly to their impulses, we would not need mediators. But our reality is that we're in development preschool. Hence, mediation is very important. So the mediator's key training is to go below the bulk of what the conflict appears to be about and actually get to the root of the matter, what the unmet needs are and unexpressed desires that are going to lead to future conflicts and are going to injure any potential agreement or solution because they haven't been addressed. And here's where it gets really deep and why mediation is not just alternative dispute resolution or a more cost-effective way of getting to agreement, but actually a pretty significant developmental moment for our society. Because in order to get to a mediated agreement, which is not going to be enforced by balance of power, people have to understand, 1, what they really want, what they really need, and 2, what the other person is all about. And that, of course, is really challenging for people without an experienced mediator or a religious epiphany or MDMA they took that morning. We'll go into exactly how that works a little later in this series, but I want to just give you a little taste right now because it's a beautiful process. What the mediator essentially has to do is create a roadmap. I call it an empathic roadmap that goes from hating the person to understanding them. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of small milestones in that roadmap. And I, for sure, am not going to take multiple of those little journeys without the other person also taking a few steps. So the mediator has to build this empathic roadmap and then invite reciprocity through getting one person to take the first step. Just a simple moment of understanding or acknowledgement or empathy or sort of aha, about, oh, what was that like for you? And then the other person will be cultivated to do the same. And then there's this positive, empathic upward spiral. And the idea is that each step softens the heart of the other person in order for them to take the next step, co-creating a virtuous cycle of empathy that eventually leads to understanding. And understanding is not agreement, but so much of what lies in the way of agreement is not, in fact, practical, but emotional. So when we can resolve those tensions and meet those deeper needs, then all the barriers to coming up to practical agreement have been dealt with. And it's just a creative problem-solving exercise, which we do all the time. So that's what mediation is really about.
Mediation is an operation that we perform on conflict.
It's not just an 8-step process where 2 people get in a room, but it's actually a deeply transformative process where the people who come out of the room are not the people who went in. Which for me is the real reason why mediation is important, and everybody should read every work that Ken Cloke has ever written, which is difficult because there's like 20 or 30 books. Mediation is the only conflict resolution process that requires personal transformation. And personal transformation or development or enlightenment or inner peace or world peace or spirituality or whatever you want to call it, because they're all synonymous, is the essential game we're playing here. And mediation is the one technique that points us directly towards.
Okay, that was the first YouTube video, and here is the second one.
So a little while ago, I made an explainer video on what is mediation. In order to do that, I got Ken on camera, gave his background, and then I wanted him to read a really boring definition of what mediation is, like this one. In essence, mediation is an informal problem-solving conversation facilitated by an experienced third party. But instead of giving me that, he gave me 16 incredibly beautiful definitions of what mediation is.
I believe that poetry is a higher form of truth.
And then he just casually added,
That's a start. I could go on for several hours.
So here we go. 16 definitions of mediation with Mediation Jedi, Ken Cloke.
Mediation is an operation that we perform on conflict in order to make it disappear. But if we make it go away without learning why it occurred, it will happen again.
So Ken's saying, don't do this to avoid. This is about engagement.
Mediation is actually the unifying principle. It is what unites people who are opposed to one another. It's the celebration of diversity.
Whoa, bet you didn't see that coming. Thought we were supposed to be fighting.
It is the precise point where yin meets and dissolves into yang.
Ken's going on a poetic roll here.
Mediation is also a kind of the heart of heartlessness. It's light that is emerging from darkness. It is a kind of unspoken request for kindness that is hidden beneath every cruelty. It's the discovery of the other within the self and the self within the other. It's what is sacred at the heart of what is profane. It's the thaw that is waiting for the ice or the ice that's waiting for the thaw. It is a kind of practice because it requires patience and openness and caring in the presence of suffering and anger and hostility and fear and grief and loss. So mediation is the way in, and it's also the way out. Mediation is moving from insult to insight, because every insult is also a confession.
Ooh, every insult is a confession. Arrow to the heart, Ken.
Conflict is a state of being stuck. So mediation becomes whatever it is that will help you become unstuck. But in order to use mediation to help you get unstuck, we have to discover what the origin of the conflict is. Not the stated origin, them. What was it about what they did that you felt unable to handle skillfully? So now we have a new definition of conflict and of mediation. Conflict is simply a lack of skill at being able to handle someone else's behavior. Well, if that's the case, what mediation consists of is figuring out a way of approaching that person's behavior skillfully. It is a way for us to create a kind of magic. And that is the title of my latest book, The Magic in Mediation. And by magic, I don't mean sleight of hand.
Sorry, Ken.
I mean something genuinely magical in the sense that the people who are in the conflict cannot imagine the possibility of ending it. And I would say out of the many thousands of mediations that I've done, almost never has anyone who is stuck in the conflict been able to imagine what it might be like for it to be over. So we can go back to the idea that mediation is an operation that is performed on conflict. And what that means is that it is conflict that determines the nature of mediation. Every mediation is different because every conflict is different.
And there you have it for this week. Thanks everybody for listening, and see you next week. Thus concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. On behalf of myself and Martine, my producer, thank you for listening. And if you never want to miss another episode, if you want to have transcripts of everything you've heard, If you want to be in delightful one-on-one communication with me, and you want to hear about upcoming live events, sign up for our newsletter. You can go to momentumlab.com/podcast and get all the information.